All right, got my cup of tea, ready to review a book. Now I'm making the potentially fatal decision to record this before I vet the cats, so there might be a lot of cats involved in the making of this review. All right, so I'm doing my first full-on book review in a long time, and I'm really excited about it. I'm bummed I don't have a physical copy of it. Read it on Kindle, but it is Mage's Blood, which is book one of the Moontide Quartet by David Hare. I loved it. Minnesota loved it. Callie, who's just off screen, loved it. Truly has been one of the most surprising books I've read in a long time. In fact, the last time that I've been this surprised by a book was Ken Liu's Dandelion Dynasty books, which I think I reviewed on this channel also with a Rave review. So this is what this is going to be like. I honestly don't know how I found out about this book and this series. I'm sure I just read it on a list or a Time Top 100 or maybe off the Reddit list that they do every once in a while. But I don't know when that was, because really what happened is I had been trying a couple of new fantasy series that I've been saving for a little while this year, and none of them hit. I said on my last video I tried Dark Tower. The first one was okay, it wasn't great. I tried the Broken Earth trilogy, and the first one was fine, but it didn't really draw me in. And so I was really wanting a summer journey to go on with a fantasy series, and so I literally just looked through my Kindle library, and somewhere along the line I bought Mage's Blood, and so I started reading it. And let me tell you what didn't happen immediately. It's sort of a slow burn at the beginning, but I have fallen in love with this book, at least. I shouldn't say this series, but so far I'm so excited to get going. And as I record this, I'm 30% through book 2 and still loving it. And in fact, book 2 is slightly better than book 1. So far, really excited about this. And this book has gone really under the radar here on BookTube, at least in my time. Came out, I think, first in 2012, so kind of before BookTube was as active as it now is, I think, post-pandemic. And I think it just sort of fell in the cracks of fantasy publishing. In fact, it is so under wraps that I had trouble writing this review, because normally when I write reviews or write my outline, I use the wikis online or different articles of reviews to remember names and faces and dates and to double check that I got things right, so I don't have to read the whole book again. But wiki for this whole series is 3 pages, and it's not really detailed. So that said, I might get some details wrong that I normally wouldn't. I tried to do some fact checking, but really it is just my first read through that's coming through on this review. But let's talk about the book itself, because I was a long preamble, but this is a great book. Just at the top, you all need to know that this is one of the most exciting series I've started in a long time, and it's got a just banger of a central plot structure that I think is really good. And that is, just like the name of the whole series suggests, the Moontide. There's 2 main continents in this world. There is the northern continent, which is called Eurus, U-R-O-S, and Antiopeia, which is the southern continent. And they really don't have that much trade interaction. They have things like airship in the world, but can't carry a lot of cargo or armies or anything, so there's really not a lot of interaction, both economically or culturally, between these 2 worlds, basically, these 2 different continents. And the seas in this world are just crazy. The moons are very close to this Earth. They don't say it quite like this. I'm adding some of my modern understanding of the world, but it creates these incredible tides. So the sea is impassable. So really, there is very little contact between these 2 things. And when this book takes place, about 300 years previously, there had been this event that created magic in the world called Gnosis, and they created these godlike figures called Ascendants, who are, just like it sounds like, very powerful wizards. And one of these all-powerful wizards, one of the most powerful, created the Moontide Bridge, which is this incredible marvel that at the closest points between these 2 continents created a literal bridge. It's called Leviathan Bridge, which is pretty cool, between the 2 continents. But the catch is, because the tides are so all over the place, the only time that this bridge is passable is a season called the Moontide, which happens once every 12 years. The sea is low enough and consistent enough that you can pass through the bridge. And initially, Anton Meros, I think is how you say his name, was the Ascendant who made it, and he wanted this to create understanding and like create peace and prosperity to these two continents by letting them connect with each other and to make, this cultural connection and also open up trade, all sorts of things, knowledge share between these two civilizations or continents. There's a lot of different empires on each continent. And that happened in the first Moontide when the Leviathan Bridge was open. It was actually this time of like a huge amount of prosperity. And in fact, as a consequence of that, the kings and queens, the nobility of the Northern Kingdom, Euros, the nobility of the Northern Kingdom didn't like this because actually the merchants in the lower classes were gaining more wealth and they were nervous about this. And so in the second Moontide, when the Leviathan Bridge appeared, instead of having this very nice connection between the two continents, they created the First Crusade, which was this religious war against the South because there's a bunch of different religions, obviously, in these different cultures, and they drummed this up, just like happened in our world, between like East and West, and created this crusade, which was like this bloody affair that was awful, pillagings and killings and rapes, and it was awful, and it was really unexpected by the southern provinces or the eastern provinces, Ethiopia. They were just expecting another kind of round of prosperity and trading, and that didn't happen. The eastern continent is very divided. There's a lot of different cultures. There's two main religions, but also a lot more than those main religions, and a lot of different kingdoms that are divided amongst themselves. So it's not a unified front, whereas the west is unified under this larger empire that has a state-sponsored religion that is very, very powerful. So one of the reasons that these crusades are so devastating is because the West comes with these huge unified armies that are like religiously based and lay waste to the East, which is more divided, and so don't put up a huge defense or have marshaled armies to meet this force. So the First Crusade is just a slaughter. When the Second Crusade happens, the same thing happens again. The East has a little bit more defense and marshals them, but for the most part, the West is victorious, take back a bunch of wealth for the kings and the queens rather than the regular people and the merchants. And very important for this first book, they gain a foothold on that continent. They actually found basically a new kingdom called Havon, which is a key plot point in this book. Because this book takes place 1 year before this fourth Moontide and when a third crusade is about to be launched, and is talking about the run-up to this crusade. So all of this history I just told you, you kind of piecemeal in this whole first book, and there's a lot of detail, obviously, that I am leaving out, but it gives this sort of really rich backstory, and it feels like you are coming in not just at the beginning of something, but in the middle of something. And I think that's in a good way, because everything you find out about the past is exciting in this book, and everything that happens obviously is exciting, and then you have an exciting of what's going to happen in the future. So it's a really well plotted book, and you come into it as a reader in the midst of action on the horizon, while also already a lot of stuff has happened that you need to catch up with, which I think makes for a very engaging reading experience. So points of view. The other huge thing I like about this book is it is a third-person, multi-perspectival story, which I love. And there's perspectives all over the place, whether on the eastern continent, whether on the western continent, in different areas of that, different powers or not powerful people. And you get to see this play out from a lot of different perspectives, which I think makes the story much more interesting. I'm just going to go over 4 of sort of the broad, like most perspectives I think you get, but there's a lot of them in here. And I think really none of them are like boring. Like sometimes in multi-perspective stories done by, not as talented authors, or maybe just not as interesting a story, there are some perspectives that are like, more of a drag. That was not the case in this book. Everyone offered me something different and new that I really, really liked. So first one is a young man called Alan Mercer, which is funny. Maybe it's Alan. I don't know. That sounds like a very basic name. I've never really thought about it until I said it out loud. Yeah, Alan Mercer.
Alan! 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 Al! Alan!
He is a student at a local Magi school. Magi is what you call the magic people here. He is a quarter blood, basically as much mage blood that you have in your system is usually how powerful you are in this world. And so he's not really that powerful, but he's powerful enough that he has to be schooled officially. And so he is at an academy. And this gives a really fun sort of like, magic school feel for a little bit of the first book. And it's also a really natural way to introduce you to the magic in this book, which I had this under strengths, and maybe I'll talk about it more in there, but I really enjoyed how magic is done in this world. I'll talk a little bit more about this, but you also get a very natural explanation in it because this kid's just in school, so he's learning about it and you're learning about it. Also very clear to Alan's story is that he is in a kingdom called Nuros, Nuros, which is a mountainous region in the larger empire of the West. And this empire had a almost successful rebellion against the empire itself like 20 years ago. So like veterans are still alive who fought in that war. And so even though they're part of the West and they have some loyalty to this empire, they have more loyalty to their local kingdom. And I think that is just a really fun element in this book as well, because so often in fantasy books, there's just like, this empire and this country is this, and then this empire and this empire is this, and that's what they believe. And there's not fractions within empires and countries, or if it's done, it's very like basic. And this country, Norris, is very complicated because there's all kinds of factions within the kingdom that is within the empire, like those who sympathize and actually like want the empire to be there and think it's better for them. There's the economic class that thinks the empire brings good economic opportunities but is more patriotic. There are those who fought in the rebellion and think they should be independent, and a lot of these in-between areas that really gives a lot of, I think, interesting points of conflicts within the larger conflict that's happening. So Alan or Alan is kind of like the regular person in the West. And then we are introduced to like regular people in the East through two main characters who are in a relationship and going to get married, Ramita and Kazim. They are in the southernmost portion of the East continent, which is kind of like India or the Indian subcontinent in our ancient history understandings of the world. I'll talk about that in a little while, that a lot of the worlds in this book reflect our own world, which is positives and has some positives and negatives. But Ramita and Kazim are in love. They're young. They're like, I think 16, and really just regular people. They're not quite poor, but they're not rich. They live together in both of their larger families in this one big compound. And really we just come into them as like a regular life. They're in the market. They're not even close to where the Crusades happen, which is way in the north. But everything is thrown into hubbub when a stranger who seems very powerful, we don't know exactly who he is, comes to south and decides to marry Ramita, this common girl. And it's a mystery of who the powerful person is that I want to reveal because we don't know for a long time. We just know they're powerful because of like their agents and the money that's involved there. But interestingly, the reason that Ramita is eventually chosen is because in her family, just kind of tick of her family, the women in her family always have twins or triplets or more. It's just this weird twerk of genetics that this rich man finds out about and values for some reason. And so both of these viewpoints are so fascinating because Ramita gives you this, she's really this powerless young woman who's taken from her life and thrown into turmoil in these power politics, just as this young, naive girl. And then Kazim is this young, naive boy who is frustrated by this and sort of has an elevated view of himself and what he can do. And so he chases after them as they go back to the northern area of this continent and wants to get revenge and steal Ramita back. And so a lot of times in these stories, you have young, immature heroes, but normally there's a guide for them or there's like a Gandalf character, but there isn't for these two characters. They're just kind of rusted into this world and trying to figure this out. And it's fascinating. And it's, again, a great way to introduce us into the world naturally rather than having to have a lot of just straight exposition dumps. So those three are our regular people level understanding. And then there's two main perspectives that give us the overview of what the powerful people are thinking. One is Lena Onborn, who's actually the aunt, we find out later, of Lan. They don't overlap ever, in this story at least. And she is a full-blooded magi, which means she's very, very powerful. Maybe half-blood? Again, the wiki wasn't sure, so I'm not 100% sure. She's a powerful magi, and she is working as a agent in Havon. Remember, that's this new kingdom that is created in this continent to protect the royal family there. So she's this professional bodyguard. She is incredibly capable. She's incredibly wise and sort of jaded in the world, and she's kind of a mercenary for hire. Obviously, that's what she's doing here. And it's unclear at the beginning of the story what she actually believes, what she wants to do. Really, she's just kind of even out for herself. She's just kind of going through the motions of her life. She's wealthy because she's a magi. She's living in this palace, but that's just how she is. But Lena also gives us a really good insight into what the East is doing to prepare for this potential crusade, because Havon is right on the border, and it can come back and forth whether they're going to try to keep the historic alliance with the Western Empire or try to protect the East Coast, because they have to live, or the Eastern Empire, not empire, but Eastern continent, because that's where they live. A lot of their religious ties to this area. So it's this interesting idea of what is going on in the Eastern continent to prepare for this Third Crusade, because there's been they call it a shihad, which I think is basically standing for a jihad, a holy war to defend against what they assume rightly is going to be a crusade coming at them by one major religion, but there's also another major religion that is maybe potentially not wanting to get involved in this, and there's a sultan who is involved. So there's all these machinations of what the East is going to do, and even though Alana is not a power player necessarily in this conflict, she's a bodyguard, but she can listen in to all of these things that are happening. So it gives us an idea of what's going on in the East. However, interestingly, we find out, and this is pretty early in one of the early chapters, that she's actually a double agent who works for someone called Gervin Guile, who's going to be the next perspective I talk about, who is basically a Secret Service CIA guy in this ancient world that has agents all over the country, and he basically is the intelligence source for this Western Empire. And we get his perspective, which shows us what the West is doing, why they're doing it, and why they're preparing for this crusade, why they're calling it, and the inner machinations of that empire, which obviously has a lot of intrigue and different factions. Like I mentioned, there's a lot of different countries within just this empire that they're nervous about potentially rebelling, while also wanting to take advantage of this Moontide. So there's a lot of things going on with Gervin Guile and his son, and especially the interesting thing about him is he gained prominence as the basically secret operative for the rebellion that happened 20 years ago. And in fact, he was only pardoned by the Empire basically because they need his services. So while he is maybe loyal to the Empire, there's also some question of his loyalties overall. And he's obviously a secret agent, which always people are distrustful of anyway. And he's a magi, which normal people are normally distrustful to as well. And again, Ilana is one of his agents in place here. So we get the high level east-west, what they're doing, and then we get regular people on the ground. And all of this is happening with incredibly intricate and fun plotting that happens in this book. So I've talked a lot about it, but I wanted to lay the table because I think this is such an unknown book that most people just haven't heard of it. And so I wanted to give a more detailed than normal overview of what you're going to be reading in this. And I think it's great. Let's talk about the positives with this book. First of all, I think you've gotten through my discussions. The depth of world here is so fun. And I do say fun purposefully. It's not like Lord of the Rings depth where there's going to be like ancient languages that no one talks or whatever. And it's not like even like Malazan that feels like you're just in one small part of the world. Like, definitely the world's been constructed for this story, but it is just fabulous to see this tapestry of story playing out in front of you and the different worlds. And as I've mentioned a couple times, how gray, complicated, whatever you want to say, the power dynamics are in this discussion. Whether that is between men and women, whether that is between magi and non-magi, whether that's between rich merchants versus the actual ruling class, and the religious aspects of this that are completely integrated in the politics of both continents and different kingdoms. And I love how complicated it is and doesn't find easy answers for any of this, while at the same time just being a fun world where crazy stuff can happen. And second part of this is the magic system is really, really fun in this book. Now, if you followed me on this page, you know that I'm sour on the hard magic system that someone like a Brandon Sanderson normally has in his works and really has popularized in modern fiction. Not always. I like Mistborn and those sort of things, but sometimes And in fact, oftentimes in the more modern Sanderson books or more recent Sanderson books, I feel like hard magic systems cut the magic out of magic. It gets somewhat tedious, sort of navel-gazy at a certain point. I think this book and the gnosis in this book has found a good way of threading what I would call maybe a hard magic system with soft edges. I don't really know how else to say that, but like there's very clear, like, this is what you can do. And actually there's like different categories of like specialties that Magi can have. This Magi is good at necromancy and thaumaturgy, but he's not good at scrying far distances, or like there's those kinds of things for sure that you can get lost at and have fun figuring out the various levels of. And there's like degrees of power, like a full-blooded mage versus a half-blood or a quarter-blood, and all that kind of stuff is there. So there's sort of that like, well-defined still in this world. But it's not so defined that I feel like there's no mystery at it, and it's still rather terrifying when someone has this power and a regular person is there. There's a couple scenes where someone like Kazim, who's not a magic person, like gets into, the same area as a Magi, and it's terrifying because of what they can do, and you don't know exactly what the extent of their power could be or what they do. And I find that extremely well done, and I really, really enjoy it. All right, other things I've done, I've mentioned a couple times. I think the religious ideology and exploring how that interacts with power, and whether someone is using religion for their own power, whether they are like true believers, but also with personal intentions, and all the mixings thereof. And not just in how religion affects your power, but the regular people that I mentioned, sort of the regular point of views, how religion takes sometimes positive aspects in their life and gives them meaning and encourages them and helps them be better versions of themselves. So there's a broad gambit spectrum of religious experience that is exhibited in these books that I think is quite well done. Some other stuff that is just kind of general stuff that I generally like in books that is here is there is sort of the Game of Thrones, anything can happen to any person at any time. There's no plot armor. Someone could be incredibly important and then all of a sudden they just leave on a business trip or something. They're not there anymore, or someone could die, or someone could lose a certain power, or someone could just be wrong about something. Like, there is one particular thing I'm thinking of where like there's this plot that involves basically someone making a wrong guess. And it's just a wrong guess. There's no like mastermind behind it. It's just like it's wrong. And I think that happens in real life, and I think that happening in books makes you as a reader know that like anything can happen. Your favorite character could actually die or be maimed or have this life-changing thing happen to them. Or they could achieve their goals, which would be crazy in this world. So I love that. It's really a page-turner, can't stop reading kind of book. And I think I got this across when I was talking about those POV situations. I feel like the characters maybe have some similar like goes of characters that you have in these sort of books. But for the most part, I felt like there's very unique point of view perspectives that I hadn't experienced before. And that's a huge part of reading for me, especially a fantasy book that I really enjoyed. And finally, all of this is accomplished in a relatively short amount of time. Now, this is still like a 750-page long book, but in the realm of fantasy, that's pretty restrained, especially for a 4-book fantasy epic that was completed in 4 books. Now, I haven't finished them all, so I don't know how that goes, but even just at the lengths of those 4, this restraint seems to stay the same. It doesn't get longer and longer, sort of Wheel of Time style. 750 pages is pretty doable for a fantasy reader, and all of this happens within that time frame, which I really, really enjoyed. All right, so there are some negatives. It's not a perfect 5 out of 5 for me, and a large part of the negatives for me revolves around the world that the author, David Hare, is quite obviously riffing on our own history and the actual reality in our world. A lot of the structure of Crusades versus the Jihad in the book is reflective of the history of Christianity and Islam in the Middle East. As I said, there's a lot of mirror images of like Hindu mythology, as well as the cultures of the Far East, as well as the ancient Near East, Persian Empire, that in Islam, like religion, the religion of the West is sort of Christianity adjacent, kind of. I think is a positive in many senses because it helps us as people reading it absorb a lot of the information because we're familiar with some of these themes, and those themes are powerful because they touch our real life. But I do think there are some negatives with that approach. One is just kind of a surface level. Sometimes it's distracting. Like I said, the magic system is called Gnosis. Ancient Greek, I studied ancient Greek in school, is just knowledge, and it just feels a little goofy sometimes. A silly example that was distracting is in one perspective, Elena is like tutoring someone, one of the royal family members, I think a prince, on how to make a decision in this particular area, and she references a thinker, Machiavelli, with an idea that is found in Machiavelli, the real life political philosopher, our world. And it's basically an exact quote of Machiavelli about having to make, they're better for the whole that might, somewhat dubious morally. Whatever, it's fine, but I felt that was kind of goofy. It's like, quote, real life people, and they just give them basically the same thing. I don't know. That was too much for me. It felt too goofy. More seriously, I do think sometimes it gets in a way of enjoying the story because David Hare obviously is not a member of all of these different cultures. You can't be both from a Christian culture and a Hindu culture and a Muslim culture at the same time, or part of the East-West, So it just gets somewhat sticky where there might be caricatures that maybe aren't offensive, but seem a little off, or again, too much like a caricature. And certain characters act certain ways. I can't help but thinking, is that reflecting upon the author's real-world view of this religion, or just this particular character? Now, of course, that's not always fair to say, but I just thought it was worth saying that sometimes in my mind, it's always concerning to have like a Western writer write about the East, which they obviously have less, information on than they do on the West. And sometimes I just found that distracting. Now, again, I'm giving this a rave review, but I think that's something that people should go in with that kind of eyes wide open. It didn't ruin my experience in any ways, but there are times that I was sort of thoughtful about whether that was the wisest course to go, to be that close to actual religions in our world. Like, as an example, like the Hindu sort of mythology, it's not called Hindu, but like this place, which Ramita is a part of, it's her culture, so she references these goddesses and gods within her belief system, and like Vishnu is like Vishana, like it's very close, which I think is distracting. I think you could have taken some of the inspiration and changed it enough where you are not at all going after or trying to represent in some way someone's real belief system in the world as it is. That's just my thought. Overall, though, you guys are probably and understand by now that I so enjoy this book and so recommend it to you. And honestly, this video is about talking people into reading this book, because I want more of you out there who are on BookTube, my friends, to read this book and give your opinion of this book. And I want this to kind of like something that all of a sudden people are reading on BookTube, because sometimes happens where like one person reads it and all of a sudden everyone's reading it. I hope that's the case, because I think this is a great book that has some really interesting themes that I want to talk about more and I want to hear other people talk about. So please, if you're watching this, pick it up, read it. If you have, let me know what you think about in the comments, or if this is on your TBR, and I don't mean like a TBR that like maybe get to someday, put it on your TBR for August or September. If you're looking for a new series, you're looking for something, let me know in the comments if this, say, yes, I'm putting this on the list, because I want people to read this book. Mage's Blood by David Hare. If you're a Kindle reader, it's like $2.99 right now in the Kindle store. Get it from your library, buy it, support this author. I'll probably have reviews of the second, third, and fourth book that I'm just planning to finish this summer. First in, last out, join me in reading this book.